All right, grown-ups, it's just our time. I love the babies, but to help you, I gotta speak my mind. This segment's here to help you grow with book reviews, lessons, and things you'll be glad to know. If your little one's restless or looking to play, send them to my other playlist. The read-alouds there will brighten their day.
Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Teacher Lady Speaks.
I'm Miss Erica, the teacher lady.
Your fairy godparent when it comes to sharing joyful stories and growing young minds. Here, we use my experience teaching tiny humans to help enhance your experience teaching tiny humans. You see what I did there? It gives you my insight, my resources, and my overall perspective from a well-seasoned educator. Hey, that's me, who understands just how hard love work can be. Now, before we continue, I have on Christmas earrings today. Why? Because I believe compassion is a gift. You see, so you can think of this episode like a lesson plan for this week's topic. It's here to answer the question, how do I get my child to get it? Whatever it may be. That's where I come in and offer support. Today's topic is all about compassion and boundaries and the connective tissue between the two. Okay? This is a crash course in how to raise a child that leads with kindness, cares about others, without carrying everything. That's the boundaries element. This is the final episode in this week's topic, which was all about compassion and boundaries. We began with a joyful read aloud of, Princess Iridescent and the Cloudy Day. I love this story. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out. We also had a behind the book review on this story, as well as one of my staples in my library, The Giving Tree. Both of these books did extremely well on teaching and showing compassion. We utilize as resources in today's lesson to teach you how to have more compassionate children who also understand the importance of boundaries. So now we're wrapping it all up with this episode of The Teacher Lady Speaks, a crash course in how to raise more compassionate, empathetic babies without teaching them to abandon their own boundaries. We're going to run that back. A crash course in how to raise more empathetic babies without teaching them to abandon their boundaries. Y'all need it a third time? This is a crash course on how to raise more empathetic, compassionate babies without teaching them to neglect or abandon their boundaries. You ready? Let's grow. Explaining compassion in a way that a 5-year-old would understand. Compassion is the way in which we care about other people. It has the ability to see a person where they're at and not feel sorry for them, which is a lesson for another time, but to try to care as best as you can. Okay? That is the foundation of compassion. It's rooted in kindness and it's rooted in care for other people. That's as simply put as I could possibly put what compassion is. And say something like, do you remember when we helped Miss Berta take her groceries inside? That was an act of compassion or an act of kindness. Do you remember when you saw that a student was having a really hard time because of how hungry they were? So you decided, you know what, I'm not that hungry. You can get your lunch first. It's an act of compassion. You can kind of give practical examples of how they have shown compassion or how you would like to receive compassion. And so it really makes me feel good when my husband makes me coffee in the morning. That's kind of a sign that he's compassionate. He knows I'm going to have a long day. He knows I love a good coffee, and it makes me feel cared about. So compassion is a way to make other people feel cared about and love by way of kindness. Now, here is the boundary piece that comes in. We have fixated so much on kindness and compassion that we have gotten away from boundaries. And so I would also explain to my child that there comes a point to where compassion and too much of something becomes painful. If you're ever trying to help somebody, but it's hurting you, you have to step back. You can still feel feelings of compassion towards that person, but you should never be in a situation to where me helping someone is going to hurt me or my family. So if I only have $10 and a stranger asks me for $10, I can be empathetic towards their situation and understand that, like, we all go through different things, but I can't give him my last $10 because then I wouldn't be able to have what I need to take care of myself. The more that I am working with educators, the more that I recognize that we are doing away with the boundaries piece when it comes to discussing compassion and kindness. The more that you talk about compassion and how to care for others, you need to continue to teach that there is a line. You do not want your baby to be taken advantage of. You don't want them to be played, but more than anything, you don't want them to feel obligated to save the world. That's not their job. You're going to have to explain that to them early so that they know. I do think it would be helpful to give them a practical example between what compassion can look like without action, just feeling, and a boundary or them kind of sitting on that emotion. So if they're playing with towers and then they look over to the right and their friend, the whole tower falls down, they can be compassionate by letting them know, like, hey, I'm sorry that happened. It doesn't mean that they have to stop their tower to go build somebody else's. So you can feel feelings of empathy and connection without laying laying a finger or having to run over to go fix their problem. Your little is not the world's problem solver. Okay? And they have to understand that. And it is a really interesting needle to thread, but it is a very important one nonetheless. Schools are required to teach. California has guides in terms of social emotional learning. So they have lessons that they recommend, but they are not mandatory. In Texas, that does not exist. So what your child is learning in school in regards to compassion and in regards to boundaries is heavily weighed, like most things, on whatever that educator deems as most important. If they were in my class, it would be part of not like this hard lesson curriculum, but it would be part of day-to-day curriculum. How could you go about supporting that person? When is it going to be too much for you and you need to step back? How did you show empathy? How did you show compassion? How did you show kindness? Thank you for being empathetic. Thank you for understanding their needs and their boundaries. Those are things that I implement in my day-to-day conversation, both in my home and in my classroom. But it's not something that the state is saying, hey, as a certified teacher, you have to do this. Which means even more so, you as the parent or as the educator who wants to continue to do better by your students are going to have to implement it on your own, because it's not something that is forced, which I can't stand that word, mandatory to be taught. Resources available to help you help your child to be more compassionate, but to stand true and stand firm in their boundaries. Two, which I'm going to bring up again, that we utilize this week. One is Princess Iridescent and the Cloudy Day. This book does a beautiful job of showing how you can be so compassionate that you can help to change a person's minds and their overall feelings. It's a beautiful starter book. So if your child is pre-K, kindergarten, and even some of first grade, I would say that this is a good introduction to compassion and to kindness. Where for me, it falls short in terms of older students, like second grade, third grade, is in the story, it is a lot of her giving herself to make this grumpy cloud feel better. Ultimately, the grumpy cloud does feel better, but we get to a point in terms of age where the message of boundaries and just letting him be grumpy is also important. And that's where the giving tree comes in as a valuable resource, because the tree kept giving. The tree gave apples, gave branches, gave leaves, gave everything, and then the tree had nothing left. You can get to a point to where you are so compassionate and giving and have such a beautiful heart that you did not do the number one rule when it comes to surviving, and that is self-preservation, making sure you are good, because the better you are, the better you can help the next person. This tree right here did way too much without being renourished and replenished, and it caused the tree to end up being a stump. Same kid that's been taking the whole time went and then sat down. You're still taking. It's a different episode. Let me stay focused. This book is good at discussing boundaries. At what point should the tree have said, baby, I'm out. I ain't got nothing else for you, or you're going to have to water me. You're going to have to give me some soil. You're going to have to do whatever needs to be done to keep me strong, because it is a very one-sided, one-way relationship. The tree is too compassionate, in my opinion, and ends up having nothing. So we are not selfish people. We are not people who are bad if we set a boundary, if we make sure that we are okay first. Compassion is so necessary for such the rough world that we live in. Self-love is even more necessary, because the more you can love yourself, the more compassion and kindness you will be able to give to others. Both of these books are valuable in their own right and deserve to have a space on your shelf when you are teaching about this topic. Now, I recently did a PD on the subject, so I'm going to pull up my notes to share with you some of the resources that you can utilize to have more compassionate babies who are still learning about boundaries. Okay, that part will always be important. The first is Go Local. Nursing homes. When you think about retirement homes or facilities that might take volunteers, animal shelters, feeding the homeless, the more your child can get involved in community work and understand the perspective of others, understand that their reality is different from other people. Now, the way that you integrate boundaries into that is letting them know that this is not their fault. Sometimes children will see people who, and I can't stand the word less fortunate, but who are differently fortunate. It will make them sad. It will make them sad. It will make them feel guilt in some ways. And that's where you want to set the boundary of you're deserving of the life you have. And you did a great job today showing up and helping those people to have a good meal. And that's okay. That's enough. When you let them know, give them permission to not have to feel bad or not have to feel sorry about their reality versus someone else's, it helps already set their mind in terms of boundaries. Let me focus on what I can do, and when I can't anymore, that has to be enough. This is something that's very difficult to do as a person who works with students, right? There comes a point in my day to where they have to go home to whatever their circumstances are. And for years, I've really struggled with a balance between home and work-life boundaries. And I still struggle, but I'm a lot better. And a part of being that lot better is I can be compassionate and care about my students and do as much as I can while simultaneously knowing that me just worrying and stressing out after work when I should be spending time with my family, my husband, and my daughter doesn't actually resolve anything. In fact, it makes things worse. So start local and start with practical examples. Another resource that I'm going to bring to your attention that I appreciate greatly is called the Greater Good Science Center, and it is based right here out of UC Berkeley. So this is a research hub that studies the science of empathy, gratitude, mindfulness, and compassion and translate it into real life tools. So they have things like principal activities, worksheets, activities that you can implement within your classroom or your home. I appreciate it because it's research based. So, the little bit of scientist in me kind of gets to like, yay. But also, I love that it's practical and it's easy to duplicate or even tweak in a way that makes sense for your classroom or for your home. The Random Act of Kindness Foundation is super cute, specifically for those kids that act and sound like King Cloud is from the book. The ones that are always grumpy, the ones who never want to be kind, never want to do nothing for nobody else. And I laugh because there's a few students that come to mind. This is a good activity for them. It's called the Random Acts of Kindness, which is funny because it ain't really random. But what it does is it gives that child practical, quick things that they can do to make somebody else or something else better. So it's just one of those things to where if you have a child that is just refusing to do anything joyful, this is a good start. And then lastly, which you will hear me recommend this organization a few times throughout my lessons because it's a valuable one to have. CASEL, which stands for Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, is the gold standard for SEL. It's an educational framework most schools should use. CASEL includes the 5 core competencies when it comes to social emotional learning. Those are self-awareness, so recognizing your own emotions, your thoughts, and your values. Self-management, which is regulating your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. Social awareness, which means showing empathy and compassion. That's what we're talking about in today's lesson. Relationship skills, which is establishing and maintaining healthy relationships, including boundaries, again, discussing today. And lastly, responsible decision making, making ethical, constructive choices and considering the well-being of others. Super valuable resource for both educators, parents, caregivers, anybody doing love work that needs a little bit more help and perspective on how to go about implementing this into your day-to-day life. Practices at home or to incorporate compassion in your day-to-day lives. It doesn't have to be that you go out to the community, give a random act of kindness, show a bit of compassion to your child, and at the end of the day, reflect. What were some ways in which you decided to show compassion? What were some ways in which you decided to set boundaries? Continue to have these conversations be part of maybe like a night routine or just a closeout to your day so that they can become familiar with the fact that both of them are all around us at all times. 2 is to normalize differences. Not everything that is different means bad. And so sometimes we take compassion for pity or feeling sorry for someone, and we don't want that. Compassion really has to do with how can I help enlighten or better their experience? What emotion am I feeling that makes me want to care about that person? You want to make sure that your child understands that just because they see something as different does not mean that it's bad. So you feeling sorry for somebody in a wheelchair is not a good act of compassion. Bad or, oh, I feel so sorry that they have to sleep outside, or these emotions of guilt do not help with sharing compassion. Compassion is simply recognizing a space that you can be to add, to support, and to love on a person by way of words, by way of materials, by way of whatever you have access to that still respects their comfort and their boundaries, and then moving on to the rest of your life. I received a scholarship, and I was giving a speech about going off to college after foster care and some of my experiences. And I remember that this woman said, "I feel so bad for you." And I said, "I'm sorry that you feel so bad for me. I don't feel bad for myself." And then I walked off. What she potentially was trying to do was show an act of compassion. I see that your story had great challenges. You've persevered, you triumphed. And now I'm going to leave you with this comment that I see what has happened to you. And as a result, I feel bad or I feel sorry for you. But she shouldn't have said that. Why? Because I didn't ask for it. I didn't invite it. And quite frankly, I don't feel sorry for myself. That isn't how I view myself. That isn't how I view my own life. So imagine how that could make me feel being a person that is speaking of these things from a place of strength and excitement for how much has happened in my life, and then being told, "Oh, I feel so sorry. I feel so bad for you." Well meaning, but poor executed. That's a discussion for you to also have with your baby. Talk about your own limits, okay? Times that you've shown compassion, but then realized you were done. Talk about the power of listening, not always doing. There is great compassion in creating space and being a sound ear for someone to be able to have a conversation with. There's also boundaries within that. Discuss when it is too much, when you have to end a phone call, when you have to leave a work meeting. When does that become too much for you, and how do you recognize those signs? For me, how I know that I am going past the point of compassion now into the point of feeling overwhelmed is I physically start to feel anxious. So as we're going through our meeting and I'm recognizing that our students are not performing at the level in which I think they should be, and I'm feeling anxious and I'm feeling worried, and how can I get them more books and more resources, and maybe we should change the curriculum, and maybe I can do this for the teachers, and I'm going down this what I call the rabbit hole. Oh, it's no longer compassion. I'm crossing over now a boundary of self-care, self-protection. And so being aware of what those signs are when you go from, "I love my students, I want to care for them, I want to make sure they're okay, I want to make sure they get what they need," to, "Oh no, I am not doing enough. Oh gosh, how do I?" There is a very clear transition at this point in my life. And when I recognize that transition going from compassion to breaking my boundaries to make sure that I am mentally okay, it is time for me to exit stage left, take a breather, drink a glass of water, go for a walk, recognize what I am doing to be able to help, and then allowing that to be enough. That is an awesome best practice to implement, not only in your child's life, but also in your own, because when you do love work, when you do work that involves people that you care about, it can take a toll because we don't always practice good boundaries. When to seek help. If you start to feel like, "Oh, my kid is no emotional connection to anybody," the random acts of kindness website she was telling me about, they stump on it. They're doing things that are very harmful. They want to hurt animals. They want to start fires. It is just beyond. They don't want to be involved with anything that is joyful and kind. Then it is time for you to get some help. Their struggles might be beyond what you're able to do. I always say as parents that we have a limit. There's only so many things we can help our babies with. This might not be one of them. At that point, you go to a guidance counselor at school if it's available. You go to a church leader to see if they have any groups or classes for that child that age, any nonprofits, a library, to your doctor and see what resources they have available, because there might be an underlying issue or something that your child needs support with past what you were able to give. You will always hear me recommend churches and libraries consistently, because regardless of whether or not you love books, and regardless of whether or not you love the Lord or that community church, they tend to have resources, community connections, and resources to help you to be able to help your child. The same is true for PTAs. If your child has a PTA and it's not filled with a bunch of chaos, join it, because you will learn so much about what's locally available to you. You'll be able to connect and meet other friends who are also parents, and the kind of relationship building just goes on and on from there. Okay. These are some of the common questions, and hopefully at this point you will be able to answer them. One of them is, how do I get my child to be more compassionate without making them feel overwhelmed or responsible for people's pain? We discussed that. We discussed that this entire lesson. But essentially, with compassion, there becomes an end. And you want to make that clear. You can help to the point that it hurts. Once it hurts you, it's no longer helpful for anybody. The second is, are children ever too young to understand compassion or boundaries? If your child is not speaking yet, if they're developmentally not in a space to where they're understanding too much, then yeah, of course they're a baby. But as soon as that baby starts to say their first words and walk around and move about the world, you can start implementing techniques of, "Daddy, compassion and kindness. It should just be part of their day to day. Compassion and kindness, boundaries, they're not things that necessarily need a whole lesson all the time. A lot of times it comes with the culture of your home. In my house, when you come into my house, you take off your shoes. That is part of our cultural belief. Okay. That is what we do in my home every day. No matter what, the shoes have to come off. You can't wear your shoes throughout the house. So it's not something that I needed a huge lesson on. It's just something that my daughter knows. When she gets to the door, we take our shoes off because that's what we've been doing. At the base level, at the most basic level, kindness and compassion, as well as boundaries, should be part of your day-to-day living, which automatically will expose your child to those same things. Does that make sense? I ask y'all that a lot, as if you can respond in the comments if there's anything that I can clarify. We've addressed this one as well. My child is way too compassionate and they're showing a little bit too much kindness for me, a bit of a pushover. We discussed that as well. Talk to them about boundaries, talk to them about how they feel. At what point did it no longer feel good to let all of these kids cut in front of them for the slide? Where did compassion end and breaking boundaries begin? Okay. I know that that was a lot of information as always, but I'm so grateful that y'all stuck through it. Thank you so much for learning with me. I hope your little loved the read out louds this week. I hope you got some valuable information from my behind the book reviews on the 2 books that were featured today. I hope you learned something about compassion and boundaries, both for your children and for yourself. If you need additional resources, make sure you're signed up for my newsletter where I will send all of this out. And I also have a couple of blog posts that you can also check out. A lot of information. I like giving what it is that I've learned. I feel like it makes life easier. Okay. Lastly, I am a book lover at the core and have created an initiative called the Pay It Forward Initiative, or the Empathy Library. It is extremely straightforward. You give what you can, and by way of that thoughtfulness and that donation, those funds get books purchased. Those purchased books go to children that need them. If you're an educator who needs books because you serve underserved communities, there's an application for you to sign up to receive books. I'm working through that list as quickly as possible. And if you are a person who has the ability to donate funds so that we can purchase those intentional books, please do so that I can knock down that list and continue to help more and more people by way of literacy and books. Until next time, remember to enjoy the moment or go be a joy in the moment. Thank you for joining me. Bye.